Well, good morning and welcome to the Law Show for this first Sunday of May. Nice to have you with us. Our guests from Murphy Battista LLP in studio, Joe Murphy and Brian Brook, personal injury lawyers both. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning, Sterling.
Joe Murphy, your name is on top of the firm, so let's you, as one of the principal partners, get us going on the firm. Tell us a little bit about Murphy Battista. It's been around for decades now. You and Joe Battista partnered up quite a long time ago now.
Sterling, we founded the firm January of 1982. There was 2 lawyers and 2 secretaries, and we rented 2 little offices in a larger law firm. I remember it well because the interest rates were 17%.
I remember those too.
And businesses were not opening, they were closing, but we opened up and over time have grown, not because we planned to grow, but rather we grew to service our clients. So the firm is now 13 lawyers and a support staff of about 45.
Has the firm always been just about personal injury?
The firm was always primarily personal injury. We do medical malpractice claims, which is part of personal injury.
Sure, yeah.
We do insurance claims, which may not be an injury, but it could be a house burned down, a building loss. And we do, Joe Battista does some estate litigation. So that's when mom dies and leaves all the money to her favorite child. That kind of thing. But personal injury is probably 95% of what we do.
And Brian Brook, you were drawn to Murphy Battista because of that commitment they have to personal injury and the ethical way in which they conduct business.
Absolutely. Murphy Battista had a reputation in the community and in the industry even when I was in law school back in the late 90s. And when I chatted with a few people about where I should try to hang my shingle once out of law school, I was told by several people, you want to go to not only where there's going to be good work, but good people and good people who care about their clients and try to take care of their clients up to trial and after trial. And Murphy Battista had a reputation, and I think continues to enjoy a reputation now, of being one of the few firms out there in British Columbia that really does try to take care of its clients even after a result at trial is done.
One of the things about the firm that you're always very upfront about, Joe, is the fact that when necessary, all lawyers on side will don the gear and go to trial. If it takes going to court to get satisfaction, then that's perfectly okay.
Well, Sterling, I believe, and this is after 35 years in the business, I believe the best way to maximize a settlement for a client, and almost every client wants to settle, but the best way to maximize that settlement is to show the insurance company you're ready, willing, and able to go to trial.
Right.
And that's something that we've always done. About 1 in 10 or 1 in 15 cases that we have in the office goes to trial, and that's a very, very, very high rate in the industry. There are some lawyers who do this kind of work who never go to trial.
Right, yeah.
And the reality is the insurance companies know that. So the settlement, I don't believe, can ever be maximized when the client has essentially hired a gunslinger, but they don't know he doesn't have any bullets in his gun.
Right. But the people at the other table in the courtroom sure know.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Yep.
And that's the reputation, Brian, that you were talking about that the firm has. And part of the appeal to you as a young lawyer looking around for the right spot to fit in was the fact that these guys are absolutely unafraid to go to court if and when necessary. And whenever that comes up is just fine.
Yep, absolutely. Joe's, during the time I've been with the firm, has demonstrated he's not afraid to take on some really tough cases.
Right.
And Joe and I have had a couple of trials that were kind of epic adventures where they really were either tough cases or really tough issues. And to be with a firm that's not only prepared to put its back behind cases like that, but put its money where its mouth is unusual.
Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about insurance, a lot about insurance on this episode of The Law Show as it pertains to individuals and their legal, their rights in many cases. But, you know, we should start off by talking about ICBC because as personal injury lawyers, Joe Murphy, you do a lot of work with ICBC because they are the defendant in most accident claims in British Columbia. And yet even though those of us who are policyholders and rage on every year when they increase our premiums, etc., and get a little miffed when they don't deal with us with velvet gloves every time we make a phone call, you insist and have every time we've talked that despite the fact that they are frequently the enemy in court, ICBC is an outstanding outfit, and we British Columbians are bloody lucky to have them.
Sterling, ICBC is the best run insurance company in the country. It provides the best product of any insurance product in the country, and it provides probably the most reasonable or the lowest premium for what they provide. And I know that by comparing the coverage and the price of someone in Alberta and someone in Ontario. And those are systems that have different coverage. If I'm in BC and I get injured in an accident, my ICBC policy provides a $150,000 fund for medical and rehab expenses. And if I'm badly hurt, that money is going to be used.
Sure.
In Alberta, that same coverage is $5,000.
Wow. That's not even the price of a wheelchair, for crying out loud.
Yeah, no, we have a fabulous system, and what ICBC has done somehow is they have created a community or an atmosphere where people go out and buy extra liability insurance.
Right.
So the average liability insurance in BC on a vehicle average is about 1.4 million. Minimum's 200,000. But people just know that it's appropriate and wise to buy the extra coverage. So we have the best insured cars in North America, BC. We have a company that's very well run. The only problem we have with ICBC is the government about once a year skims off about it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
To spend as they wish.
Well, yeah, and ICBC is supposed to be run at a break-even basis, and it is, except for this money that the government siphons off every year.
Right. And that's why our premiums keep going up.
Well, the premiums actually have been level for the most part over the last 10 years, whereas the insurance companies outside BC have been saying to their policyholders, our costs are going up, we've got to crank your premiums up, when in fact the costs didn't go up.
Well, and plus the fact that in any other province in Canada, or most other provinces in Canada, Brian, once you have an accident or two, you're not allowed to be insured by that company anymore. They'll just cut you loose. We don't want your business anymore. Go somewhere else. And, of course, that doesn't happen in BC.
No. As Joe said, I do think we have one of the best insurance systems in the country in British Columbia.
If that is the case, then, why do so many policyholders and motorists in our province consider them the enemy? That the treatment they get at the claim center or wherever is, you're here to fleece us, you're here to game us, you're here to rip us off. So let's see some evidence to the contrary. It's kind of an almost adversarial environment you enter into when off the street or out of your slightly broken car you will make it to a claim center. Suddenly they're not hostile, but they're looking at you like, this guy's going to try and rip us off for sure.
You know, Sterling, every now and then I think I've got a tough job, and I have to remind myself life could be worse. I could be, an examiner working for ICBC on a bad day. I do think that a lot of them have challenging jobs. I think they have a challenging employer sometimes. And there's a difference between the value and the quality of the insurance products that ICBC offers to the motoring public in British Columbia, and the way it deals with claims. We could be here all day talking about and complaining about ICBC's policy and the way they manage and deal with claims of people who are injured as a result of motor vehicle accidents.
And that's your work, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think we've got probably better and more constructive things to do than complain about the way ICBC handles these things. The reality is ICBC has to try to control its losses and its payouts. The insurance industry has developed a whole bunch of mechanisms and tricks and tools of the trade to try to do that. And often it's at the expense of, the motoring public, people who are injured.
Right.
That's why we lawyers come into the picture.
Okay, now you've already mentioned that we have among the best coverage in Canada, and we'll talk about
In North America.
I was just going to say North America. We'll talk about cross-border comparisons a little bit because there's some pretty sharp contrasts there in terms of coverage numbers. But Joe, this is something you and I have on the Law Show talked about in the past, and this is probably the smartest 35 or 40 bucks any British Columbia driver can ever spend year after year after year. It's a little thing you tick off on your insurance, on your car insurance, called UMP. What is UMP?
UMP, Sterling, stands for Underinsured Motorist Protection, and it's really coverage that covers you and your family if an underinsured motorist runs into you and injures you.
Right.
And the most common scenario is some tourist from Washington State or Oregon comes up and causes an accident, and they have 200,000 or 100,000 in coverage, and these people are badly injured. So ICBC says, as part of the basic policy, we'll ensure that there's $1 million of insurance monies available if someone's injured by someone who doesn't have enough insurance.
Okay.
And for $24 a year...
Oh, 24 now.
$24 a year.
Not even 35. How about
I can insure myself and my family and have that pool go from $1 million to $2 million. So it's the best. It's $2 a month.
Yeah.
It makes no sense for someone not to have it. But there are some people that don't have it, and I believe they don't have it because they don't understand it's available.
Well,
because who wouldn't spend $2 a month for themselves and their own family?
Now, in some of that responsibility, I'm sure, has to fall, Brian, on the shoulders of the broker. When you're renewing your car insurance, it's generally a pretty automatic exercise. You go to the place where you always buy it. The nice person behind the counter you see once a year, every year, goes, same terms and conditions. You go, yep, and then they tell you how much it's going to cost. And if you haven't ticked the UMP box in the past, they're not likely to say, well, you want to buy UMP this year or not, are they?
I don't know if I agree with that. I test my broker every time I renew my insurance, and they're usually pretty good about saying, you really should buy the excess UMP. It's a great deal.
Okay, well, this is what they should be doing. I
Absolutely.
agree with you, right.
I don't think any broker in British Columbia should be able to get away without strongly recommending that every one of their customers purchase excess UMP.
Okay.
It's such a good deal. It's so absolutely necessary, tragically, in so many cases.
Mm-hmm.
There's no excuse not to educate or really strongly push people in that direction when they're renewing their insurance.
Absolutely. And Joe, you just opened the door to that cross-border comparison stuff we were promising moments ago, and talking about one of the major reasons British Columbian drivers ought to have underinsured motorist protection, or UMP, is because outsiders coming into our province from other places may not have the same degree of coverage that is automatic to British Columbians. And typically, you were saying, Brian, it's in California, it's less than $50,000, isn't it?
Yeah, the Americans are notorious for having pretty cheap liability coverage, State Farm or whatever insurers.
All state and all that.
Yeah, the problem is you get what you pay for, or you don't get what you don't pay for. And if you're paying a low annual premium for a third-party liability coverage down there, you could get a $35,000 or $50,000 policy, and it's nothing.
Sure.
It doesn't really pay for much at all.
Right.
The great tragedy is that if you're a person who's driving and through a simple act of negligence or inattention, you cause an accident where somebody's badly injured, you have a small insurance policy, and that person could go after you not only for the insurance money, but for your home, for your future earnings.
Of course.
An accident and an injury that could have easily been insured at a relatively low price with no real inconvenience to the person who's driving suddenly has the potential to be a devastating life event. Mm-hmm. And it's a sad reality in a lot of the lower states, and one that we don't have to deal with in British Columbia very often, thankfully.
Yeah, Joe, coming north from California, is there a little more coverage for people from Oregon and Washington State then?
I don't understand that there's a big difference in the amount of insurance the average driver in California has compared to Oregon, compared to Washington.
All pretty much the
They're
same.
all very low. I had a case once, Sterling, where I was dealing with an American adjuster, and he said to me, "Good news, I've got a big policy." And I said, "Great, how much?" And he said, $300,000. So in their world, that's a big policy.
Okay, and ours is a minimum of $1 million.
No,
isn't
it's
it?
a minimum of 200,000
Oh.
liability, but then the ump coverage that covers yourself and your family says the pool of insurance will be $1 million.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But it's just a different world that we live in. It's a different mindset, and people in BC are aware of the reason for insurance. It's to protect me in case I run into someone. I don't want them coming after my house.
Right.
And it's also to protect if the person who's injured if I'm driving or if someone's driving my car.
Right. Brian, are we in British Columbia then protected from that worst case scenario that you were describing for the person in California, carrying the barest possible minimum insurance, creating an accident, bringing hellfire and brimstone down upon himself, being responsible for serious amounts of money, literally, that they'll be paying for the rest of their earthly days?
Not necessarily. I mean, one of the realities and one of the great things about British Columbia is you can get a lot of good quality insurance coverage for a reasonably good price through ICBC. And there's a bunch of private insurers that are offering automotive coverage.
Yeah, that's
as well.
true. You got to buy the basics from ICBC, and then it's optional as to the additional coverage, right?
Yep, absolutely. But I mean, in this day and age, we're dealing with a lot of claims where people's lives are catastrophically changed, by spinal cord injuries, by significant brain injuries where that person is unable to work or care for themselves.
Right.
And often these claims can stretch into, being worth $8, $10, $12 million. They're very, very significant claims. Given that the largest third-party liability policy you can currently purchase from ICBC is a $5 million policy, any severe brain injury or spinal cord injury claim has the potential to be greater than somebody's automotive coverage. And we could get into a long discussion about where ICBC's interests and the insured person, the negligent driver's interests, sort of part company because they do at some point. But I mean, I think the moral of the story is, yeah, a large claim could put a negligent driver, a careless driver, at risk beyond the amount of liability coverage they carry.
And so the fact that we carry more than some of our American neighbors shouldn't give us any sense of false security that, now we're impervious to any damage claims.
Sterling, I think it's important for people in BC to understand that if they loan their car to someone and that person has an accident, is negligent, they as the owner are just as responsible as the driver. So in the United States, the owner of a car is not automatically liable if the driver's negligent.
Oh, I see.
In BC, if you consent to someone driving your car, and the consent can be, yes, here, use my car, it's just known that the wife or the children can use it, you're as responsible as they are if there's an accident. So people have to understand when they loan their car out, they're not just risking that the car is going to come back smashed up, but that there could be this large claim made against them because they're just as responsible as the driver.
I need to take a quick break, and I'm going to follow up on more on the car thing, particularly as it applies to younger people. Got some nieces or nephews or the grandkids coming by this summer, and they're going to borrow the car, maybe head down to the mall. Well, you better check your insurance policy. If you've got a grown-up insurance policy, your kids, your grandkids, your nieces and nephews may not be covered remotely. And we'll talk also about crossing the border with those travel insurance documents. Our guests from Murphy Battista LLP, Joe Murphy and Brian Brook. This is The Law Show on AM 650.